Okay, have we taken a look or no? That's it?
Is it turned up too loud?
Okay, how about that? Any better? A little bit better? A little bit better? How's that? Is that a little bit better? Can we hear? Can we hear? Can we hear? Sherry? No? Twice? Okay.
I can do it without.
Try without it. Try without it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Franklin R. Shirley Classic. We are especially excited this evening to be announcing that it is not only the Franklin R. Shirley Classic, but the opportunity to host the Appalachia State Tournament, the Mountaineers, as well. This evening is the kickoff of what will no doubtedly be an adventure for many of you in the room and for many of us in the hosting process. We ask from the outset that you will help us to make the tournament better by showing us your patience and giving us your cordial advice when appropriate. What we're hoping to do this evening is a tradition that has been established for the Coach of the Year award presentation. I will therefore not bore you with too many tournament logistic details. I do want to say, however, that for those of you who are going to be debating at Wake Forest tomorrow, one of the primary differences between this year and other years is that we will be distributing the food at a tent in the middle of the Mag Quad, which is in front of Carswell Hall. So for those of you that have been here in years past and gone to individual buildings, it'll be in the tent. So that's kind of the moral of the story. For those of you staying here at the Sundance, make sure tomorrow morning that you pick up the bag of food and the coffee to-go cup that's being prepared for you in lieu of a traditional continental breakfast. You'll have the same items served on campus. So with that said, if it's at all possible for some people to make their way a little bit closer to the front, I have the ability to project my voice, but I'm not sure that Dr. Loudon, who's known to be a bit of a mumbler, will have the ability to get the distance involved. So if you could take a couple steps forward, that would be helpful. Tonight I have the honor of introducing as our MC, Dr. Alan Loudon. Dr. Loudon was the director of debate at Wake Forest for over 30 years, and in the process took it from a program that some of you may not actually believe this, but that the dean told Dr. Loudon when he walked in the first day not to get too comfortable because he expected that the debate program would be cut at the end of the year. Dr. Loudon, in those 30 years, built a program that I have the honor of being the director of debate with today, and he did that with the help of Ross Kennedy Smith, who the award is named after, that we'll be presenting this evening. Many of you were here for the memorial last year, and so I'll say less about that now and let Dr. Loudon introduce that part of the award. So with that said, the graduate director and the Department of Communication full professor at Wake Forest University, Dr. Alan Loudon.
Is that working? Can you hear a little bit? That may help if it gets too weird. Jared is awfully nice. He's too nice there. You get most of those things because you just get old. And so that's why you end up with the academic part of it. This award meant a lot to Ross, but I don't think he wants to dwell on all that part. He wants to get on with life. That was always his thing. He loved this tournament. He loved debaters. He loved we do. So that's really what this is about. And the award now has been around for a while. I wanted to thank Ed Panetta from Georgia, who did the heavy lifting on this and all the work on doing the ballots and the nomination and everything else to select the award. Up here, you can't see it because it's too small. I had it sort of fixed. But Roger Solt, Dave Arnett, Eric Morris, Ed Panetta, Scott Harris, Sherry Hall, Dallas Perkins, Bill Noonan, Will Repko, Joe Collins, Ken Strange, and myself are listed there as folks who have won the award, who were actually at the tournament. I also highlighted Jim Unger, Doug Duke, Ross Smith, and Scott Deathridge as a reminder of the loss we've had in the community in the last 2 years, because all those folks did a heck of a lot. This award was the Glenn Pelham Award at one point when it resided in South Carolina, and probably just the Coach of the Year award that Glenn Pelham gave out when it was at Emory. And now it's at Wake Forest. It had been renamed last year, as you heard Melissa talk with her blessing. She talked about Annabelle Haygood, the director at Alabama, who was something else from everything I understand. And Pelham, she was the first winner, and the person who won it had to have 4 things. Now, it's not a surprise with the slideshow going there who won this year, but it is nonetheless a pleasure. One of the 4 characteristics that a person ought to have. The first one was a consistent record of fielding nationally competitive teams. Roger, my God, for 30-some years at Kentucky. It's easy to do for a year or 2, or even 5 maybe, but 30-some years he did that. And last year he had a team in the quarterfinals of the NET, and he had teams in the finals of the NET, and he had consistent first rounds. My God. He actually was in quarterfinals at Nationals himself. Secondly, a consistent record of a top judge. And they voted on that for a few decades, and I think Roger keeps making that list. Even though I'm not sure how long he's going to be here during a tournament, if he's even on the judge card, but my guess is at least half your rounds you'd gladly substitute Roger in. After that long career, he still was one of the most preferred judges in the country. And there's reason for that. Part of which is he's sort of a gentle critic, but also has things to say. He's a nice person, but also gets to the bottom of it. And above all, he had integrity in that role, and he knew what was going on. I lost that about 20 years ago when I was coaching, and Roger maintained it forever until the very end. So he's a consistent top judge as measured by all your rankings and the votes. A contribution to the evolution of the debate field. This is something you probably don't know. Roger has been, in a lot of ways, kind of the historian of theory and debate for 30 years. And he's published extensively on articles and things that when you get to that point, when you're doing that thesis or whatever, you can go find some of those. If you're probably using some now for the theory part. But in addition to that, he's published all kinds of things and has been kind of, can you think of a theory in 35 years in which does not have Roger's fingerprints? Pretty hard to do. He has been there, he's been recorded it, he's analyzed it, he writes as the English gifted person he is, and has been a service to the community that most of us aren't even, many are not aware of. And finally, the intangible fourth, the intangible taking debate outside of itself and outside of that person. Roger is an ambassador for our community. He's an ambassador for debate and always has been. Did it quit working? Here we go. Always thoughtful. You never doubt. Now this is interesting. Some people you kind of figure out later that they're really good or they made a contribution. You knew that with Roger from the first meeting. And you knew that through decades. And you knew that when he judged. And you knew that when you debated for him. There was never a doubt. And he's also, not only that, no doubt that he's a top coach. He just felt it right out of the gate. But he's also, no doubt, a person that you'd value to call a friend. Now he's the second largest employer in some county in Kentucky. He's a businessman. We call him Colonel Roger. I'm not sure, but he's a big businessman up there, and probably seems to be enjoying it. And Roger also has a quality that I value a lot. Roger's loyal, and always has been. And so it's really a pleasure for us to give the award because Roger is an alum of Wake Forest. When he came to Wake Forest, I went to that dean who said he's getting rid of the program that Jared talked about a year later, and I said, can I see Roger's application, a form for Wake Forest? This is when he's a high school senior in Ohio. He's applying to Wake Forest. He had to send a little picture, right? So what do you think that picture looked like? I was kind of curious. What did Roger look like then versus now? Pretty much the same, actually, but which is kind of a blessing. Roger had this little short beard. And you could see everything as it was going to unfold the whole way. Roger wrote a section on that period in a new book that just came out on the fourth stanza of the history of Wake Forest University. He's such a valued alum that Mr. Wake Forest, who wrote the book, contacted him. And one of the things Roger said in the book was, he's talking about what debate means versus academics. Not versus, but with academics. Debate was an intensely absorbing activity. Too absorbing in the view of one of my professors. I learned a great deal at Wake Forest classroom, but as much as I learned from Dr. Bree about existentialism, or Dr. Steintrager about political philosophy, Dr. Wilson about the Romantic poets, Dr. Faso about Shakespeare, or Dr. Belfeld about Freud, I know that I learned as much in Wake's debate squad room, at Pizza Garden, which was a restaurant within spitting distance here, in the van, in hotel rooms, and in the classrooms across the country where we debated. It is without doubt that Roger has been a teacher to all of us, and we regret it. We're indebted. So, to help us out in this process, we're not going to take all night because you're waiting for pairings, I know. Help us out in this process, Trevor Wells graciously, on very short notice, drove down from Kentucky, and he's going to bring us the greetings from the University of Kentucky group. Trevor is a logger there, very active and superior alumni of the program, and got two really, really cute kids. What a pretty wonderful.
It's all good, don't want to mess that up. Feel free to think of me as the Kentucky debater to be named later. I'm far from the most decorated and accomplished of Roger Solt's debaters, and I'm nowhere near the most eloquent, either then or now. However, I suspect I'm here for a couple of reasons. Is this working at all, or should I just try to project?
Boom it out.
All right. I seldom mumble, I frequently slur, but I'll see what I can do. The practical one is that Professor Loudon was able to find my cell phone number from Facebook yesterday morning at about 8:30 and woke me up. After some more logical choices to come here and speak sort of fell through at the last moment. This is combined in some sense with my paralyzing case of demon deacon envy that manifests itself in an eerie inability to say no to anything that the Wake Forest people ever asked me to do. Which now, having said so, I'll probably be picking up Krispy Kremes at 6 o'clock in the morning or something. The more intangible reason that I'm speaking, I suspect, is that I carry a reputation of having what I guess I described as sort of an underdeveloped sense of tact and propriety, which presumably will keep this ceremony a little bit lighter than it would be otherwise. Hey, don't be taking those.
All right, I'm just going to get rid of this crazy stuff that's happening here behind me.
I debated for Roger for a couple years in the 1990s. After that, I found myself attending tournaments with Kentucky for another decade or so, judging poorly, coaching maybe slightly less poorly, pretty much anything other than producing evidence, which has never been my strong point. But I'm also a Lexington, Kentucky born and bred kid, and I just completed my second year of middle school debate when Kentucky won the 1986 National Debate Tournament. I still have a copy of the Lexington Herald Leader somewhere in my basement. I tried to dig it out and verify my recollection that it was a picture of Ouida and Brownell holding the trophy with Patterson trying to worm his way into the picture and Roger nowhere to be seen because he's unassuming and in the background like he always would be. Well, not tonight, Raj. That's not the way it works. That's not the reason we're here tonight. I've had a series of man crushes over the years that have resulted in some fairly strange idolatry, like Second Commandment violations. Around 1987, I ran into this book that contained a transcript of Kentucky's NDT win, pictures and whatnot. And I spent like 2 days worth of lunch money blowing up a picture of Roger that was fairly pixelated, but frankly life-size when I got done. And had it hanging on my dorm room at camp. So when Professor Loudon asked me if I could make a trip down to Winston-Salem today to help honor Roger, I obviously jumped at the chance. Well, to be fair, I told him I had to check with the boss, and after she said it was okay, I decided to come down. But after maybe an hour or so later, after reading what Melissa had to say last year and what Dan Schauman had to say, I got totally freaked out because I'm not equipped for anything that poignant or eloquent. However, Professor Wade's description of the historical underpinnings of the Coach of the Year award gave me some guideposts, and I can't think of anywhere more appropriate to start than the fact that Coach of the Year winners demonstrate a consistent record of fielding nationally competitive teams. Now, Roger's bona fides in this area are well established. He coached 1986 NDT champions. Decade and a half later, dragged another team to the finals of the NDT. Coached 15 and a half bid teams by my math. The half was the first time ever that 3 teams qualified for bids, and the third one couldn't get one. 11 top 10 speakers to NDT, 9 of whom were in the top 5. 20 teams to the elims of the NDT, 14 of them still debating on Monday. That's just the NDT, and that's just the data I could find sitting in my computer yesterday afternoon. For a few years there, he owned the season opener at the Ulrich at Northern Iowa. In fact, I think we just stopped taking the traveling trophy back to Cedar Falls. He brought about competitive success when the team was brimming with talent and did it when the cupboard was frankly a little bare. It's an impressive run under any circumstances. What I think I can bring to the table today is some context that will demonstrate that Roger's coaching performance was flat out amazing given the conditions under which he accomplished it. Up through the late 1990s, the Kentucky coaching staff consisted of only Roger and Dr. Patterson. Now, the division of responsibility was somewhat less than equal. Just to get to a tournament, Roger had to pick up the van at some ungodly hour. I don't even know when that happened. Drive around Lexington to 3 or 4 different places, pick up debaters and evidence, usually packing, repacking the van each time. And then as the last stop, even when it wasn't the most logical, convenient, or efficient way to get on the interstate, collect Dr. Patterson and a seemingly random assortment of luggage and indescribable crap that he decided to bring with him to the tournament. Now, more often than not, Roger himself would make a couple of trips to and from Dr. Patterson's front door and tote Dr. Patterson's stuff from that to the van. Why one of us didn't get out of the van and help with that, I have no idea. More than likely we were asleep or a bunch of prima donnas, but it had to be done, and Roger did it. Take note of that because that's sort of going to be a recurring theme. Once Dr. Patterson got himself situated into the shotgun seat of the van, Roger would assist with the assembly/construction of the auxiliary sound system. Just a boombox sitting on top of a couple tubs between the 2 front bucket seats. But there was frequently some complicating factor, like a missing power cord located in one of these bags Dr. Patterson had with him soon thereafter, or incorrectly installed batteries, all of which Roger would fix. Eventually, he would successfully troubleshoot that radio issue and start driving the van towards our destination. Now, just to be clear, the only airline tickets that Kentucky ever purchased in those days were so that Dr. Patterson could get to high school tournaments. So the van's destination may be a long way off, like 950 some miles to Boston or 1,000 miles to Waco. Roger drove every second of every trip himself. Now, even ignoring the extreme length of some of these trips and the occasional inclement weather, these were some of the worst driving conditions imaginable. All right, to begin with, from the second we hit the on-ramp onto I-64 or I-75, Roger had to endure this blasting wall of noise to which his shotgun passenger DJ subjected the debaters. The volume level was past 11. I firmly believe the primary goal was to frustrate our ability to communicate with each other so that we wouldn't, foment revolution. Dr. Patterson usually pre-prepared a few hours of material, which was the most interesting part. It always began with Willie Nelson's On the Road Again. Dr. Patterson interrupting in the middle to give a turn-by-turn description of the path we would take to whatever destination we were headed to. We usually got a rundown of the current Billboard hits after that. followed by top hits from the previous 10 years, 20 years, depending on Dr. Patterson's energy level. Sometimes we get all the way back to Hank Snow and Floyd Claimer crap. Sometimes we get a rundown of Dr. Patterson's 10 favorite albums of that particular year. Anyway, the music itself is one thing, but Dr. Patterson's narration, heavily influenced by / plagiarized from Rolling Stone, Spin Magazine, could get grating after a while. The real problem, however, came when the pre-prepared mixtape concluded and Roger and the rest of us were serenaded by Dr. Patterson's 75 favorite Louie Louie versions or Amazing Grace covers. Depending on Dr. Patterson's level of sadism, it could even be like a Linda Ronstadt retrospective. In any event, you get the general idea, really loud, miserable. We're all aware that 15-passenger vans are not the safest way to travel. Adding in the music so loud you can't hear yourself think thing probably didn't help matters anyway. In addition, Roger usually only had the use of one mirror, his driver's side mirror. The rear view mirror was useless because of bodies and luggage. The passenger side mirror was inexplicably not in play either. The reason is that because while he blasted his wall of sound at us, Dr. Patterson typically read no fewer than 2 newspapers spread to their full width. So Roger couldn't look out the window, and his baseline stress level of being responsible for all of our lives no doubt spiked a bit, given that he had to manage that task effectively with blinders on. Okay, add in some arbitrary stopping. I suspect that the tradition of stopping to buy lottery tickets in Cincinnati predated the late 80s when the Commonwealth of Kentucky started selling lottery tickets of its own to finance our higher education system. Suck it, Mississippi, we're 49. But the tradition continued at least through the mid-1990s. I'm pretty sure that this mandatory stop on all northbound excursions added close to an hour to our trips for no good reason. And then we had what I'll call the somewhere hell it's 5 o'clock here stops for ice at the nearest location to be augmented by something from one of Dr. Patterson's many bags. There were any other number of other complications. There was some kind of an issue with the gas credit card, which was only accepted in like 5 service stations in the eastern half of the United States. So Roger had to make sure we stopped at particular places to fill up. Debaters whined all the time about everything. That's no surprise to anyone, I suspect. Roger had to play mediator when Dr. Patterson's boombox and or cassette tapes went missing and or were vandalized. He had to play mediator when certain debaters would fill syringes with their own urine and threaten to stab other debaters to get more seat space. Van travel's unpleasant for everyone. This was pure hell. At some point, however, we'd get to the tournament city in our hotel. And once Dr. Patterson managed to get us checked in, the over-under being about 45 minutes for that transaction, Roger would supervise the unloading and then would usually end up responsible for getting Dr. Patterson's bags up to the room they'd share together. Now, again, this was it had to be done, so Roger did it sort of thing. But in the interest of full disclosure, it was kind of it had to be done competently, so Roger did it issue. This happened a lot. Dr. Patterson would delegate some responsibility to the debaters. We would either negligently or intentionally do it incompetently, and then Roger would take over that responsibility from there on. Example, I once packed the wrong bag on top of the valet cart, and it tumbled en route, glass shattered, and the sweet smell of Kentucky nectar filled the air. Dr. Patterson gets totally enraged, picked the bag up 2 or 3 times, and spiked it into the elevator floor, all the while giving me this fairly detailed lecture about how Massachusetts blue laws made this an unforgivable crime because he couldn't replace what had been broken. So, now we're at the tournament, and all Roger has to do is coach 3 or 4 teams by himself, including all that goes along with that, like copy runs, getting the keys so we can retrieve things we'd forgotten, judge a bunch of debates, and take care of getting Dr. Patterson to and from the hotel during the tournament, because Dr. Patterson's on a little bit different schedule than everyone else and would like to arrive during round 2 and go back sometime in the early afternoon. Now, while we're talking about judging, for a long time Roger judged just about every prelim. At some point, far later than most people in their debate careers, he transitioned into what I believe he referred to as the senior status schedule, which still had him judging 6 debates a lot of the time, and then later on 4. And except for a couple of occasions when kind tournament administrators released him early, he always judged one elimination round past when Kentucky was eliminated, which, given the team's competitive success, usually meant 3, 4, 5 rounds on the last day of the tournament. Now, as Professor Loudon's already said, he was one heck of a judge, put a lot into it. The best judge of the 1980s, on the short list of the best judge of the 90s, third. I don't know who 1 and 2 were, probably some putzes. But anecdotally, I can tell you that before I went to Kentucky, I debated at another school and had an opportunity to actually be judged by Roger, and I believe just once, but maybe I only remember the win. We won, and that ballot sat on my debate partner's dorm room door for a year and a half. What Roger did as an at-tournament coach was a sight to behold. The results probably speak for themselves, but I have a captive audience for a few minutes anyway, so I'll let you in on a dirty secret. We commonly found ourselves under-researched and lacking any coherent strategy against the affirmative we were about to debate. The sad thing is, a lot of these affirmatives have been run all semester, but it just happened. We'd hand Roger an extremely thin file, or a stack of blocked cards, or occasionally even articles that were just bracketed, and say, help. So Roger would wander off in the corner and come back 20 minutes later with a link story or a tricky counter plan and some explanation like, I've written this theory block, I wouldn't extend past number 13. Because little Roger handwriting, there were 20 arguments to justify this abusive counterplan we were going to use that was going to give us a chance to win that didn't exist 20 minutes before. Here's the funny thing. Those scribbles on legal pads changed the activity. Things y'all now take for granted about counterplans were the source of major battles in the 1990s. And Roger and we, his proxies, were a major factor in how those battles were ultimately resolved. Roger was quite simply the best debate theory mind I've ever been involved with. Listening to him wax about debate theory for hours at a time was some of my favorite aspects of debating. And we would have won another NDT if Russ Hubbard had listened more closely during the dispositionality lecture in any of the 4 years he sat through it and comprehended the fact that he could concede a counterplan's inability to solve without shifting his advocacy. There's no better coach in the world when you're about to debate a fresh affirmative. By fresh, I mean something that's previously disclosed a round or 2 before. Roger knows something, in fact, probably a lot, about everything. I helped him move once. I had a pickup truck in those days, so I always got called when somebody had to move. And we moved thousands of books, all of which Roger had read and all of which Roger could produce information from on a dime. In any event, tournaments. Eventually we'd lose, or more often than we probably deserved, we'd win. We'd immediately pile back into the van and head back to Lexington. So your recipe looks like this. Take one already exhausted Roger, add same dose of hell as the outbound trip, and we made it back in one piece every time. After dropping everyone off, starting with Dr. Patterson, Roger would end just about every trip by cleaning that van by himself of all the debris that had accumulated over the past 4 or 5 days. Paper, food, syringes, etc. Needless to say, he didn't get paid near enough to do any of that. And let me make it clear that I know that all you coaches out there put up with a lot for the activity you love, and few, if any of you, are compensated or appreciated for everything you do. I find it hard to believe, however, that anyone has had to put up with as much as Roger did for as long as he did, and with the level of success that he enjoyed. Looking back, I'm more than a little red-faced to admit that we did a piss-poor job of telling him how much we appreciated everything he did. In fairness, we were a bunch of self-absorbed teenagers and early 20-somethings, and our levels of awareness and empathy probably weren't worse than our peers. But the fact is we dropped the ball a lot when it came to simple little things like thanking him for running that gauntlet with us weekend after weekend. Roger's never been big on pomp and circumstance, and unless I miss my guess, he'd prefer as little to do as possible, and all this is probably far too much to do. So I'll just say this. I played sports extremely poorly from about the time I could walk through high school. Soccer, baseball, basketball. I even ran track for a while. There are probably a couple dozen men and women who lost hair trying to get me on the right side of the field or court, try to teach me how to hit a free throw or avoid embarrassing the entire school by getting lapped by junior high girls in the 2-mile. But when I hear a reference to coach, I think of one person. That's a lie. I mean, I'm a Kentuckian, so I think of Coach Calipari as my coach. But the other coach I think of is Roger. For 3 decades, he did everything that could reasonably be asked of him as a coach and one hell of a lot more. This Ross K. Smith Coach of the Year award is recognition and thanks for the community, for everything Roger's done over his career. But on behalf of all the Kentucky debaters, I want to start whittling down on that gratitude arrearage we've all built up with my own personal thanks, Coach. Thank you.
And Sherry Hall has got a few words from the debate community, I think, is how I put that, right? Is that fair?
Yeah. I guess this sounds like it's working. Do we have this one? Let's turn that one off.
Yeah.
There we go. We gather here this evening to honor the career of one of the giants of this activity and probably the most gracious and kind members of this community that I have ever known. My colleague and good friend, Roger Solt. As I've heard Roger say on many occasions, we have a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. Roman numeral 1, Roger the coach. Large letter A, the beginning years. Number 1, Roger comes to Kentucky in 1980. It would be difficult to imagine a coach arriving at a new job facing higher expectations than Roger Solt. When he arrived at Kentucky, debaters regarded him as one of, if not the very best coach in the United States. From their previous conversations with him and their experience with him as judges, as a judge, they were convinced of his brilliance. And from that first class of debaters in 1980 through the last group that he coached for the 2009-2010 season, to a person, they would tell you that Roger lived up to those expectations. Subpoint B, Roger's awards and achievements. The previous people have already mentioned a bunch of these, so I'll kind of cut this part down a little. But I do want to mention again that Roger had great, number 1, NDT team success. He coached the NDT champions in 1986, Weta Papka and David Brownell, and the NDT finalists in 2002, Russ Hubbard and Mike Tetzlaff. I still remember the joy and excitement that the Kentucky crowd had celebrating that victory in Hanover in 1986. We went to the hotel bar after they kind of kicked us out of the final round room, and everybody was still hooting and hollering, and there was a live band playing at the bar. And Dallas went running up to the band and said, "Do you take requests? Do you take requests?" And they said, "Well, maybe. What do you want?" And he said, "Well, the University of Kentucky has just won the NDT. We want you to play My Old Kentucky Home." This is a band playing at a bar in a hotel in Vermont. My Old Kentucky Home was not exactly part of their repertoire. So we did the best we could and kind of hummed it and fumbled and mumbled through the words and got what we could out of it. In addition to the other achievements that people have mentioned, number 2, Copeland Award winner, Roger coached Paul Skiermont and Jason Patil to the Copeland Award winners in 1994. And number 3, top speakers at the NDT, and I believe that this is a record, though I didn't actually go count, but it just seemed like such a high number. Roger coached 5 different top speakers at the NDT. Jeff Jones in 1981, Steve Mancuso in 1982, T.A. McKinney in 1991, and Paul Skiermont in 1994 and 1995. Roger was voted as one of the top 5 coaches in the 1980s, He coached a team that finished as chosen as one of the top 5 teams in the 1980s. Kentucky had more teams, finished in the top 5 for teams with elimination rounds at the NDT and elimination round victories at the NDT. And as has already been mentioned, number 5, Roger went out with a bang, surprising everyone with quarterfinal appearances at both the NDT and CETA last year, saving the best that this team had for the last. Large letter C, how he coached. Number 1, he was a patient teacher. Whether you were a high school superstar or a debater with little competitive experience, Roger took the time to work with his debaters and teach them how to debate. Ouida, one of his former debaters, shared with me her experience of meeting Roger for the first time on her 18th birthday, her first day at a UK debate meeting, as a very green debater with little background in debate basics, much less advanced theory. She says that Roger taught her everything she knows about debate and molded her into a successful debater, success that culminated in winning the NDT in 1986. Number 2, ideas, not cards. When I was an assistant at Kentucky, coaches were not permitted to cut evidence. The debaters were supposed to do it all themselves, a policy which Roger adhered to, despite the obvious temptation to do otherwise. Instead of cutting cards, he functioned as a non-stop source of high-quality arguments. As Steve Mancuso put it, college debate's currency then was smart ideas, and Roger was the Federal Reserve Board. Number 3, the strategy notebook. When Roger was faced with crafting answers to new arguments or strategies by other people, he would go around and talk to people who had judged or debated against the argument and ask many careful, pointed questions. He always had his spiral notebook with him, and he would write down whatever people said, and then he would begin to design Kentucky's strategic response in his meticulously organized manner. Later, I would see him coaching his debaters for a round, dictating arguments to them from this notebook that they would be furiously scribbling down before their round. Russ Hubbard talked about the spiral binder that Roger bought for him after he cleared at GSU by unexpectedly knocking off a first-round team in round 8. And he said that he knew that that's when he had gotten Roger's attention as a real coach, when Roger bought him that spiral notebook in which he could write down his strategic ideas. Ouida also remarked on the strategy notebooks as a defining aspect of debating for Roger. Number 4, success in a difficult environment. See the last speech, and I'll just go on for that. Number 5, staying power. Roger coached Kentucky debaters for 30 years. He offered his unselfish, tireless, and dedicated service to a single debate program for 3 solid decades. I would like for anybody in the audience out here who has coached the same debate program for 30 years or more to please raise their hands. Well, there should be at least a couple. But that's Ken and Dallas I know are 2 that I think of, and Al. That's an amazing accomplishment to spend that much time dedicating yourselves to one program. Gil Skillman wrote that without the continuity, experience, and coaching ability that he brought to the program, I don't see how it could have maintained its national prominence for all this time. UK debate owes him a great deal. Number 6, bus driver. Again, I'll just say see previous speech. I could not possibly add to that. Large letter D, reviews from former debaters. Number 1, Marie DeZuris. Marie writes, although not very demonstrative with his emotions, Roger always made it obvious that he cared by the passion with which he coached and the support that he gave to all of his teams, no matter who you were debating or how well you were doing at the tournament. He never made us feel stupid for losing debates we should have won. He never doubted us when the odds were against us in any given debate. Roger and Kentucky debate have become synonymous in my memory. I can never think of one without thinking of the other. Number 2, Steve Mancuso. Steve writes, I remember what a comforting influence he was. He and I had a tradition those years of going out to dinner the night before we left Lexington for tournaments. Every time at Columbia's or Joe Bologna's, Roger would ask me this question: what are you most worried about at this tournament? And then we'd sit there over dinner and figure out our best answers or strategy. It was comforting to know that Roger valued what was troubling me and helped me to address it. Number 3, Aaron Call. Aaron writes, I would like to share one fond memory involving Roger. He was so proud of Russ and Mike's second place finish at the 2002 NDT. We began the long van ride back to Lexington on Tuesday and finally reached Kentucky very late at night. Instead of driving straight to Lexington, we made an impromptu pit stop at the Holly Hill Inn. Roger went in, carrying the trophy into the restaurant high above his head in a triumphant gesture, and we were all greeted by Weta, who Roger had coached to the NDT championship in 1986. Things had come full circle in his long and illustrious coaching career. We all sat down and had one of the best dinners of my entire life, well after midnight. Roman numeral 2, Roger as educator, judge, institute instructor, and theory guru. Subpoint A, Roger the judge. Number 1, Roger is a good judge. He was chosen as the judge of the decade for the 1980s and third in the 1990s. Number 2, Roger can be intimidating. One of the first big rounds I debated was against Harvard's top team in the first round of the first tournament of the year, and Roger was our judge. I couldn't decide if I was more intimidated debating against Harvard or having Roger judge me. The round was really close, and Roger took a really long time to decide it. Way too much time for a round that should have been a blowout first debate of the year for Harvard. But Roger took every round seriously. I think one of the main reasons that he was regarded as one of the top judges during most of the time that he judged was his reputation for fairness and the seriousness with which he took the responsibility of judging. Even though we lost that round, I decided that I wanted him as a judge as often as possible after that. Subpoint B, contribution to theoretical development. I'll skip my comments and refer to Al's comments on that because we were going to say about the same thing.
That mic may be working out in the back of the room.
Oh, is this one not good?
It's not working in the back of the room.
Oh, it's not? Is this one working better? Okay, we'll skip to that one. Sorry.
It's like the voice of
Subpoint C, or as Roger would say, I'm sorry, large letter C, summer debate camp instructor. Number 1, significant influence. Raise your hand if you have ever attended a workshop where Roger was on the staff. Many of the people in this room have had their debate experience shaped and influenced by Roger, whether having the direct experience of being in his lab or sitting through his lectures. If you were at a camp where Roger was on the staff, you knew who he was. Number 2, Roger is one of the all-time great summer lab leaders. His preparation and effort were unparalleled. He was one of the most in-demand instructors in the country, and he provided invaluable education to thousands of high school students over the years. Number 3, the Solt lecture. If you have ever had the good fortune to listen to a Roger Solt lecture, then you have hopefully recognized the style in which I am delivering my remarks this evening. A Solt lecture was an experience. I remember once Dallas got very upset with some kids in our lab. We decided to do some mini debates on topicality after Roger had given a very extensive topicality lecture where he had given the arguments and then the answers to the arguments and the answers to the answers to the arguments, and you get the idea. And Dallas sort of yelled at one of the kids, and they're like, "You're not making any of the answers that Roger made. Didn't you take notes during his lecture?" And the kid in question sheepishly admitted that he found the lecture overwhelming and had simply given up. After that, I decided to start prepping my lab before a Roger lecture. And I would get them all excited about taking notes and told them that I took notes during Roger's lectures and frequently would refer back to them when I was coaching my own debaters during the year. His ability to take complex subjects, at least they were complex to me, and break them down into easy to understand components, mixed in with his wit and occasional sexual innuendos that might have been a little over the head of some of his high school audience, was always good for a laugh and always put on quite a show. Once, when I was giving a lecture, I decided that I would deliver my lecture in Roger style. And so I'd done the same thing, I thought, and is still on? Okay. I'd done the same thing, made my list of arguments and the answers to the arguments. It was a disaster. I didn't cover. I just created confusion more than anything else. He just made it look so easy. And I learned the hard way that delivering lectures like that is a real gift. Large letter D, contribution to creating the next generation of coaches. Aaron Call writes that most about what I know about debate and coaching was taught to me by Roger. And I knew that I would love to be coached by him. Roger offered me a scholarship to debate for Kentucky in January of 1996, and it was one of the best days of my life. Most of my professional and personal success is due to the time that I spent at Kentucky being coached by Roger. Roman numeral 3. Is this
Yeah, you're cool.
Okay, it sounds bad. Okay, number 3, Roger the friend. Large letter A. Roger is a generous and caring friend. When I was in Kentucky, I lived alone, and I had not taken very good care of my teeth, and I ended up having to have all of my wisdom teeth removed at the same time. And I was a little freaked out about the fact that I was going to have to do this, and I lived alone. And so Roger went with me, drove me there, then drove me back home afterwards, and he and Weta came by to check on me while I was recovering over the weekend. And despite the fact that I had been advised by the doctors that I should probably take it easy and not try to go into class on Monday, I thought, well, all I have to do is give a test, so I'll go into my class. How hard can that be? It was probably not a good decision. I ended up fainting in class and being taken to the hospital, and Roger was there for me and was there to take care of me and kind of probably check up on me a little more carefully after that. We have taken trips together, attended numerous concerts together over the summers, lived together in houses and apartments at debate camps, and enjoyed way too many fine meals together. Large letter B, comments from former debaters. Number 1, Steve Mancuso writes, as the many years have gone by, Roger and I remained close friends and shared a lifetime of valuable experiences. We taught over a year's worth of summer workshops and labs together. We worked in more than 50 tab rooms together, drove to concerts. We were successful business partners and failed business partners. He worked for me and I worked for him. Roger made a point of consoling and helping me in the worst times of my life, and we grieved the loss of good, close friends together. Through all of that, Roger has been a truly valuable friend. Number 2, Weta. She writes that Roger has been so much more than a debate coach in my life. He is my best friend, my dining and business partner. His support has never wavered. He is a constant, true, and loyal friend. Roman numeral 4, parting and concluding thoughts. Subpoint A from Weta. Weta writes that Roger is a beloved figure in Midway, Kentucky. His staff at Holly Hill Inn loves his quiet, listening nature. In a troubled economic climate where unemployment in Kentucky has just dropped to 10%, Roger has helped to employ over 90 people and just created 20 new jobs. He could have invested his money in many things, all of which would have been more profitable than an old house on a hill in a little town in Kentucky. Instead, he invested in me and our mutual idea of hospitality and welcome. In 28 years, I have never heard him say an unkind word about anyone, and that includes JW. And when I'm on my high horse about something, as I frequently am, he tries to temper my impulsive bursts. He was a fantastic debate coach. He taught me more than all the classes at UK combined. He really taught me how to think, how to talk, how to persuade, how to refrain, how to never back down and always persevere, how to learn from defeat, and how to be gracious in victory. Victorious we were, dear Roger, all because of you. Congratulations. Subpoint B, Mancuso. He writes, I'm glad Wake Forest decided to honor Roger here. This is Roger's debate home. It's where his best friend lived, it's his grounding, and now it's a place that has honored him as he so richly deserves. Will you all please join me in applauding this year's winner of the Coach of the Year Award, Roger Solt.
For those of you that would like to continue the celebration with Roger, there will be a post-conference dinner in the boardroom right next door, reception I should say, for coaches and friends to be more intimate with Roger. Second of all, we have pairings for the Franklin R. Shirley Classic behind you in the room where you received your food. You will find Alex Limball, Suwan, and Ozzy with the pairings. So please head that direction. We will see all of you tomorrow morning bright and early. Thank you for coming.
Work? Nope. Yeah, I do work.